What if the worst time in human history was also the reason you're alive today? The Middle Ages are remembered as a nightmare. Filthy streets, deadly diseases, public executions, starvation. But that version of history hides something strange. Because while Europe was collapsing, humanity was quietly reinventing itself. And almost nobody noticed. Imagine waking up at 4 a.m. to the sound of church bells echoing through cold stone streets. No alarms, no electricity, no heating, just darkness and survival. You throw on rough wool clothing still damp from yesterday's rain and step outside into a town that smells like smoke, mud, sweat, and animals. This is your life now. And if you think you'd survive easily, you probably wouldn't. Most people during the Middle Ages never traveled farther than a few miles from where they were born. Your world was tiny. Your future was already decided. If your father was a farmer, you were a farmer. If your family was poor, you stayed poor. There was almost no escape. But here's the strange part. Despite the misery, medieval people genuinely believed they were living in the center of God's plan. Every drought, every plague, every comet in the sky felt like a message from heaven or a warning. And that fear controlled everything. The church wasn't just a religion. It was the government, the education system, the law, and the explanation for the unknown. Most people couldn't even read. So whatever they were told became truth. But that's not even the craziest part. Even basic survival was brutal. Food shortages could wipe out entire villages. Winters killed thousands. One infected cut could become a death sentence. And if war came near your town, your life could disappear overnight. Yet somehow, people still laughed, still danced, still celebrated. And that contradiction is where the Middle Ages become terrifyingly human. Your day officially begins before sunrise and ends in exhaustion. The market opens at 6 a.m., and every second matters. Merchants shout over each other while farmers drag carts through muddy roads. Blacksmiths hammer glowing iron. Bakers rush to sell bread before it hardens like stone. The entire town moves like a machine built on desperation. Because if you don't earn money today, you might not eat tonight. And this is where it gets weird. The rich and the poor lived in completely different realities, sometimes only a few streets apart. Inside castles, nobles stuffed themselves with roasted meat, sweet wine, and expensive sugar imported from distant lands. Outside those walls, peasants survived on cabbage, beans, dark bread, and hope. But strangely, the peasants were often healthier. The nobles had terrible teeth from sugar overload. Many were overweight. Some barely exercised at all. Meanwhile, commoners worked non-stop, ate simpler diets, and stayed physically strong. History never tells you that part. And then there was hygiene. Or rather, the complete lack of it. Forget modern bathrooms. Most homes had chamber pots. Waste was dumped into streets. Fleas and rats thrived everywhere. People masked terrible smells with herbs, flowers, or perfume because bathing too often was considered unhealthy in some places. But here's the disturbing twist. Nobody thought this was unusual. To them, this was normal life. And while commoners struggled to survive, the upper classes obsessed over entertainment. Massive feasts, dancing, music, jousting tournaments where armored knights smashed into each other for glory and applause. Crowds loved it. But those tournaments sometimes turned deadly. Broken bones, crushed skulls, blood in the dirt, and audiences treated it like a festival. What happens next changes everything. Because beneath the celebrations and religious ceremonies, fear was slowly building. Fear of punishment, fear of sin, fear of being accused. And in medieval Europe, accusation alone could destroy your life. Imagine being declared guilty before anyone even checks the evidence. That actually happened. In the Middle Ages, justice was terrifyingly simple. If someone accused you of a crime, logic didn't matter nearly as much as superstition. Trials weren't about proving innocence. They were about surviving impossible tests. And one of them was horrifying. It was called trial by ordeal. Here's how it worked. You'd be tied up and thrown into water. If you floated, people believed the water rejected you because you served the devil. Guilty. Punishment followed immediately. But if you sank, congratulations. You were innocent, assuming you survived drowning first. And somehow, people accepted this as justice. But here's the strange part. The medieval world wasn't completely ignorant. In fact, many educated people already knew the earth was round centuries before Columbus sailed anywhere. Mechanical clocks appeared during this era. Universities began forming. The printing press was on the horizon. The so-called Dark Ages were secretly laying foundations for the modern world. And that changes the entire story. Because while society looked primitive on the surface, massive intellectual changes were happening underneath. Monks copied ancient texts by hand. Scientists studied astronomy. Architects built gigantic cathedrals without modern machines. How did they even do that? Nobody fully understands how some medieval structures were engineered so precisely using the tools they had. But that's not even the craziest part. For all their innovation, medieval people still believed disease could spread through bad smells, curses, or divine punishment. Medicine was terrifying. Doctors used leeches, bloodletting, and bizarre herbal mixtures that often made patients worse. And then, something arrived that no one could explain. At first, it looked harmless. A fever, a cough, swollen black lumps under the skin. Then entire towns started disappearing. And within a few years, Europe would descend into one of the darkest catastrophes humanity had ever seen. The Black Death didn't just kill people. It shattered reality itself. Imagine watching half the people you know vanish in months. Streets empty. Churches overflowing with bodies. Entire families locked inside homes, waiting to die. The plague spread so fast that some cities ran out of places to bury the dead. And nobody knew why. That's what made it truly terrifying. There were no microscopes. No germ theory. No antibiotics. People blamed poisoned air, angry gods, witches, foreigners, anything they could think of. Fear became more contagious than the disease itself. And this is where it gets weird. The pandemic accidentally changed human history forever. Because when millions died, labor suddenly became valuable. Survivors could demand better wages. Feudal systems weakened. Entire social structures cracked apart. The thing that nearly destroyed Europe also helped transform it. That twist changed everything. For centuries, nobles controlled land, wealth, and power. Peasants had almost no freedom. But after the plague, kingdoms desperately needed workers. Opportunities slowly opened. Old systems started collapsing. And from that chaos, the Renaissance emerged. Art exploded. Science accelerated. People began questioning ancient beliefs instead of blindly accepting them. Curiosity replaced fear. Observation replaced superstition. Humanity started waking up. But here's the haunting part. Without the suffering of the Middle Ages, modern civilization might not exist the way it does today. The brutality forced innovation. The disasters forced adaptation. The collapse forced reinvention. And suddenly the Dark Ages don't seem so dark anymore. Because beneath the mud, disease, and violence, humanity was evolving. Quietly, painfully. And maybe that's the real reason this era still fascinates us. Not because it was barbaric, but because it reveals what humans become when survival is all that matters. Now imagine historians 500 years from now studying us the same way we study them. What would horrify them? Would they laugh at our technology the way we laugh at medieval medicine? Would they stare at our diets, addictions, and endless screens with disbelief? Would they think we were advanced, or just another civilization pretending to understand the world? That question becomes uncomfortable fast, because the people of the Middle Ages didn't think they were primitive. To them, their world felt normal, rational, safe enough. They couldn't see the flaws surrounding them because they were living inside them, just like us. And that's the final twist nobody talks about. The Middle Ages weren't simply an age of ignorance. They were a mirror, a warning about how fragile civilization really is. One plague, one collapse, one breakdown in order, and modern life could unravel faster than we want to believe. But here's the strange part. Even in misery, humans adapted. They fell in love, raised families, told stories, celebrated festivals, laughed at jokes, danced during harvest nights while death lingered nearby. That resilience might be the most unbelievable part of all. Because no matter how brutal the world became, people still found reasons to keep going. And maybe that's why the Middle Ages continue haunting our imagination centuries later. Not because they were dark, but because they prove humanity can survive darkness almost indefinitely. But there's one question history never fully answers. If you were suddenly thrown into medieval Europe tomorrow, stripped of your phone, your medicine, your electricity, your modern knowledge, how long would you actually last before the Middle Ages broke you too? And honestly, Would our future descendants ask the exact same thing about us?